Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. My name's Colleen Leahy. Just to give you a little background about me and how I got to where I'm doing what I'm doing. I have two children, both boys. One has special needs and one is an overachiever. My son with special needs is he's got multiple diagnoses. He's got like 11 different overlapping diagnoses. So not anyone that you can point at and say, aha, that's the one that I'm going to be focusing on, because it's hard to tell where one starts and another takes up. So anyway, I knew that he would benefit from scouting. I grew up as a campfire girl, and I knew that that's something that I really wanted my kids to be involved in. I really didn't know how the journey was going to play out for him, but I was committed to supporting him through whatever journey that took him. And I was grateful that when we started him in Cub Scouts, he really took to it. It was something that really enhanced his life. He really enjoyed it. It was something that we knew very early on that he would want to take from Cub Scouts to a Boy Scout level. So my husband and I were committed to making sure that we were there to help him be successful in that. Now, that journey kind of morphed into a whole different journey, because as he crossed over into Boy Scouts, I was asked to step up to be an assistant scoutmaster. And as part of that, I became the person. Our scoutmaster, while was a wonderful guy, he didn't really have the bandwidth to understand or accommodate any kind of differences. And what we found is that a lot of parents in the area found out by one way or another that there was a kid with special needs in our unit, and our unit became the unit that people would seek out if they had kids with learning differences. Now, I was very often the person that would have to administer the meds and look at everybody's medical forms and determine exactly what kind of accommodations they needed. And I was really shocked to find out very early on that easily 1/4 of the 60 kids in our unit had something. And whether the parents chose to disclose it or not, when I'm looking at the medical forms, it was very clear that there were kids that had some sort of need. And that was eye-opening for me, because there are so many times that when you glance at a crowd, and it's easy to pick out the kids in crutches and braces and wheelchairs. It's even easy to pick up somebody that's got a hearing aid. But it's the amount of invisible disabilities that we were encountering was really eye-opening to me. Now, over the course of my scouting journey, I served as our district training chair. I was our council activities chair. I'm on the council special needs committee. I'm on the council advancement committee. And I plan a lot of large scale events for merit badge opportunities. And what I started doing a whole bunch of years ago is anytime I was advertising anything that we were doing for activities, if we were planning a camporee or a Scoutorama or a merit badge event, I always had in the body of our registration is, if your scout needs any special accommodations in order to be successful, reach out. There's no way that you can plan for every eventuality. What you can do is open the door and make it so that people can start a conversation. Because anytime you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. You don't know what the next kid walking through the door with autism is going to be facing and what kind of supports that they're going to need. So my recommendation right off the bat is just to make it a welcoming environment. Then related to that, I also work as, I'm on the steering committee for an organization called Project Search that finds jobs and educational supports to place kids with developmental disabilities employment opportunities. So, for instance, in the state of Illinois, 85% of all people with developmental disabilities are unemployed. 100% of the graduates of our Project Search program are employed by at least 16 hours a week, 16 going up to full-time employment. So I've been involved with that for about 7 years now, and that's been a whole nother journey. So anyway, that's a little bit about who I am and how I got here. I will tell you that when I talked to Trish and was coming up with what we were going to present this evening, I took a bunch of different PowerPoint presentations that were available through National, and also reached out to the National Committee for even more content, and Frankenstein together a presentation. So doing the best I can here. This slide that you're seeing right here, this really struck me. If any of you have taken DEI training, if you're a citizenship and society merit badge counselor, that is the first step, is to take the DEI training. And it's actually one of the best online training for scouting I've ever encountered. But what really hit me when I was taking this training was this statement: diversity is being invited to the party, equity is having an accessible dance floor, inclusion is being asked to dance, and belonging is dancing like no one's watching. And that really hit me, because that's actually, it gave me chills the first time I read it, because they're like, yes, that's exactly what we want. We want to make sure that our kids have supports necessary so that they can be successful in this program. And all of the pictures that you see here are events that I was a part of, and these are pictures that I have taken. Upper left, we've got a young man that we were teaching archery. So our Cub Scout was learning archery. Down below, we've got a young man in a wheelchair who was one of our attendees for NYLT last summer. And in anticipation of him coming out and joining us, we had to walk the campsites, make sure that his wheelchair had power, have handicap accessible bathrooms. We had to check out the terrain to make sure that he could get to all the program areas, and make sure that we can truly welcome him and include him to the full extent of that program. And then the other two pictures to the right there, the boys are setting up a chair for another young man who had special needs that was attending an NYLT program. And at the far right is our closing ceremony, where they're all hugging him. And I've never seen a more inclusive group in my entire life. The kids totally embraced it. If you give them the tools and get out of their way, they will take up the mantle and run with it. And all too often, I think our kids are standing on the sidelines, and we overthink it. And really making sure that you're opening doors and offering opportunities and giving the kids the tools to take it up on their own is really where we're at with this, because we're trying to grow people that are compassionate and kind and look out for the people around them. And that's what I've seen. I've seen it in action, and it's a beautiful thing when it comes together. Anyway, this statistic really struck me, that 19.8% of children in rural USA and 17.4% of urban children have a disability or condition that limits functional skills. So as I was saying, what hit me when I was collecting people's medical forms is how many kids had medicine for some condition or another, had some invisible disability. There's quite a few out there. Whether or not it has a label, it's there. And it's, I think, enlightening to find out that that is there, because it helps us all be more sensitive to the needs of the kids, because there's verbal and nonverbal communication that we're getting from these kids, and being able to accommodate them and be sensitive to the fact that they are experiencing things in a different way than neurotypical kids is really key. This is something I kept in here from National. Wise leaders expect problems, but don't consider overwhelming. And though you may view a scout with a disability as an individual with significant differences, the reality is he or she is not. All scouts have different needs. The wise leader will recognize this and be prepared to help. So essentially what this is telling us is treat each kid as an individual. because, you know, whether you want to put a label on it as having a disability or not, every kid comes to you with a set of needs. And, you know, it's up to you to figure out how you're going to fulfill that need and meet them where they're at. So what is a disability? As it's saying here, a condition that may limit a person's movement, senses, or activities. But really, when you're looking at it, they fall in a bunch of different categories. You've got the physical ones, which typically you can eyeball and say, aha, that person is wearing glasses, they're sitting in a wheelchair, they're walking with a cane, they have a limp. The learning disabilities are a little bit harder to spot because kids can present as neurotypical, but then they're not absorbing the same way. They're not learning in the same manners. And, you know, trying to figure out how to accommodate those. Cognitive or developmental can impact so many different things in terms of where they start out and where they end up, what their trajectory is going to be with you. Emotional, I think any of the disabilities, any of the categories have an emotional component to them because, you know, the kids are carrying with them that baggage, if you will, of what's expected of them, what their challenges are, what their frustrations are, the barriers between them and success. Those are the types of things that can bubble over and impact your meetings and your interactions with them. And then the social piece. Very often, kids with special needs don't get the social piece. They don't put all of the pieces in place that allow them to figure out when it's okay to speak out and when it's more appropriate for them to be quiet, when they should be silly and when it's okay, you know, to do that versus when it's not. Those are all things that they have to learn, and they learn best by doing. But it's not a matter of handing them a welcome guide and say, this is our expectations of you. Bring this home and read it and come back and be perfect. That's not going to happen. So you have to figure out how they function and how best to meet their needs. So as far as you as leaders, what do you need to know to get ready for this? Every kid comes with a bag of tricks. I don't care if they're neurologically typical or not. Every kid has a bag of tricks, something that their parents know motivates them, something that knows that, you know, their parents are going to be able to tell you that, you know, these are the kids' fears. These are the kids' stressors. These are the things that they do exceptionally well. These are the things that they find challenging. Every kid has a collection of those bag of tricks. And it's your job as a leader to figure out what that is. Now, if you are planning, and you should be, having a joining meeting, and you're going to hear joining meeting through this a couple of different times, as the kids are crossing over, meeting with the parents, meeting with the scouts, and developing together what that bag of tricks is going to be critical to your success. Because you shouldn't have to guess, right? Somebody already knows what those things are. Just getting to the answers so that you can start getting on the same page with the kids is great foundation. So getting some basic information about the Scout, what equipment is necessary, you know, like if they have a wheelchair, do they need to be able to plug it in? If they communicate best by an iPad, you know, is there a program that you should be familiar with so that you're on the same page with them? Making sure there's power supplies for planning those events. Making sure that you understand what their diagnosis and their health issues are. Now, there's going to be people that join in there and going to share that information with you. If it is a health and safety issue, if they're taking medication, you need to know what that is. There are sometimes with invisible disabilities that parents are just not going to share that with you. They don't want to have their kids labeled. Now, different parents have different philosophies. With my kid, I was on every camp out with him. I'm not the expert in every kid. If anybody asks you why am I the one doing this? Because I stepped up and because I care, not because I'm an expert in your kid or any other kid. I'm an expert in my kid. So what I've gotten really good about is making people feel comfortable sharing information about their kids so I can help them better. And that doesn't always mean that they share their diagnosis. I just had one of my first girl in my girl unit just made Eagle. She has an IEP. I worked with her since we welcomed girls into scouting. I don't know what her diagnosis is, but I didn't need to know because I sat down with her parents and I found out what all those stressors were, how she worked best. I found out everything that I needed to know. Do I need to know her diagnosis? Not so very much. I just needed to know how I could help her be successful with her goals. Medications, you do need to understand. And I would also encourage you to make sure that you have very frank discussions with families on medication holidays, if you will. What I mean by this is I've had parents send kids to camp with me with medication only to get there to find out that the kid will say, oh, well, I only have to take that when I need it. Well, your medical form says you need it. Well, and then you're on the phone with parents and, well, oh yeah, he gets to decide. Those are the types of things that you need to know before you take anybody's kids somewhere. That shouldn't be a conversation that you're having in a parking lot as somebody's handing you medication through the window and you're about to pull off. And I learned my lesson early on to have those discussions so that I understood very clearly what those medications were. Any allergies they might have, and then things to avoid. And those things to avoid can be anything from environmental to food, to, medications. So understanding all of that. But it's not just getting that information from the parents. It's making sure that you're on the same page with the scouts. Once you have that information, have a conversation with the scout themselves. They need to be engaged in their journey. They need to own their journey. So empowering them to do that. In many cases, a lot of kids that have all sorts of different diagnoses very often haven't been given the opportunity to advocate for themselves. And this is their opportunity to do that. So that, if a parent is not going with them on every camp out, and that may be the case for you sometimes, it's really important that you have the kids buy-in. So starting that conversation early on, have that conversation, talk about their strengths, get them to verbalize to you what it is that they want from scouting. And that conversation starts that buy-in where they're going to be more committed to the results. Are there going to be bumps in the road? Absolutely. But if you can start these conversations early, when you have those bumps in the road, you've already established a communication so that they're going to be more comfortable with coming to you and voicing whatever it is that they're having issues with, or being open to you voicing it if you need to go back and recap and say, hey, this is what I think went really well. This is what I think we need to work on better next time, and making sure that you have that open dialogue. And then understanding how a scout learns best. Knowing whether they're an auditory learner, are they a visual learner? Do they need to touch it, feel it, immerse themselves in it? That's how my son learns. Essentially with his primary disability, he has vision and he seems able-bodied, but the way his visual input doesn't get filed in the right spot in the filing cabinet in his brain. So he's only taking in 10% of visual input. So essentially, we have to teach him like he's blind. Now, if you met my son, you wouldn't know that. But understanding that about any of these kids is going to be critical in making sure that, hey, when you're doing the EDGE method, how exactly is that going to look for this kid? What are you going to have to do to make sure that they're absorbing that? So again, have them be part of that journey. You're going to work with the parents with this joining conference. So we've talked about the joining conference, and What we recommend is that you have a joining conference for every scout, because every scout's going to have to function within your unit, right? And understanding how any one of those kids' work is going to be beneficial to you, as the unit. But it also means that if you're having it with everybody in the unit, the kids that have special needs aren't standing out. And we have found that we learned so much in those joining conferences that we have gotten in the habit in my unit and in a number of other units that I know of, that it's becoming the culture for us. That's what we're recommending across the board at our roundtables. And anytime we have seminars like this, we talk about these joining conferences and the benefit for everybody.
So
Pardon me.
Colleen,
Yes.
and I'm not sure if you're going to bring it up on a later slide. Your joining conference, because I know, like you said, it should be separate from their new parent orientation, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Roughly how long? What does this look like, or is like, what does this joining conference look like, and roughly how long? What kind of information? That kind of stuff.
That can vary depending on what you want to get from it. So on the, oh, hang on, like 2 or 3 slides down, I give
Okay.
one of the forms that I have put together that works for me, but it can be modified for whatever it is that you want to learn about. So if I could just ask you to hold that thought for a minute and we'll circle back to it.
That's perfectly fine.
But as part of this joining conference, you want to make sure that you understand the full picture of the skit. So, the strengths, weaknesses, triggers, all of those types of things are good to find out. Getting the parents to express what their concerns are, their own concerns, not just their kids. Like I've had parents, share with me all sorts of different things. I'm concerned about my kid tenting with so-and-so. I'm concerned about the fact that, I had a family member who died of drowning, and I'm really nervous about my kid being near the water. I've had, so it's not just the kids you're learning about, it's your parents too. And it's giving you an opportunity to have this conversation, because the joining conference happens with the parent and or the kids. You can decide whether or not you want the kids to be part of it. I find that having the joining conference with the parents for the first conversation, where I'm trying to fill out the form, is more beneficial. And then once I gather that information, taking that information on so that the unit leader, or however your unit is structured, whether it's like the new crossover assistant scoutmaster, is meeting with these kids and making sure that they understand everything that the parents have shared with us. If they have any triggers, knowing what those are, any kind of adaptations that you have at home. So for my son, for instance, I acted as his scribe because he had tremors so bad he couldn't hold a writing implement. For the most part, I would work as a scribe. So if I was not going to be at his elbow at an event, letting a unit leader know that he would need a scribe, then they could partner him with a buddy who could serve that purpose. Because I didn't want my kid going through scouts with me at his elbow. I had the bag of tricks on him, and I could interpret it in a way that nobody else could. But although I was on almost every single camp out, I was also the parent sitting across the campsite, and if my son yelled mom, I would respond with, your mom's not here, ask your SPL. So my kid knew early on that I was there as a resource for the unit, not necessarily as the resource for him. Yeah, be very careful about asking for the diagnosis. Some people are just not going to share that. If they feel like they want to, that's great, but don't ask for it, because that could just put you in an awkward situation. And then if they do share it, just make sure that you're supportive of whatever it is. Now, the other things that we need to know from parents, sensitivity issues are sensitivity things like, some people are sensitive to sound. Some people are sensitive to textures. Some people have sensory issues as far as heights, climbing, fabrics, things like that. So understanding what those are going in. Do they have any sleep disruption issues? I had one kid that parent didn't tell me that he slept, he was a sleepwalker. And the first camp out I went on with this kid, I found him in the middle of a field with no shoes on and like completely disoriented as to he had worked his way out into Gilwell Field. So he's out in a field with flagpole by himself, nowhere near his tent. And I had to shoo him back into his tent, tie his tent closed, and then I booby trapped his tent with cowbells after that. And I don't think I got any sleep for the rest of the week, but the parents are like, oh, yeah, we weren't sure he'd do that at camp. Weren't sure? You knew he did it before? Oh, okay. Like that would be a good thing to know because I'd like to come back with every kid I'd leave with. Some kids do have issues with large groups, the commotion, the social expectations, people just moving around. And then, as I mentioned, sound can be a big trigger for some kids. So when you're getting this information, make sure you're touching on the medication and whether or not the medication is super sensitive to time. There are some people that are, what do you call it? Chemically sensitive, where you have to give them their medication exactly on the nose of when it's supposed to. Otherwise, you could have impacts on, that medication dose dropping off or being, too high for where it needs to be. And when you're accepting responsibility for somebody's kid, you're accepting that responsibility as well. Now, with that said, do you have to accept the responsibility for somebody else's kid? No. Health and safety comes first. So if they're super, super sensitive, if you have concerns, and this is not something that you want to take on, it's certainly within your rights to bring that up to the parent and say that you're uncomfortable with it. There are some kids that are sensitive enough that I have encountered that we had a nurse practitioner that used to camp with us that would administer meds for one kid, but if he wasn't there, if he wasn't willing to do that as a medical professional, there was nobody else. One of our youth had juvenile diabetes and he had a pump. None of the rest of us were certified with the use of a pump. And it wasn't something that we were comfortable with. So it's okay to ask the parents to get registered and to go camping with you. They might have no other responsibilities other than administering meds to their kids, but it's okay to ask. And then
So question for you, because I know this is something that some units agree on and disagree on. Storage of medication. So I know, like, for example, summer camp, a lot of them will give out like lock boxes, that kind of thing. Do you find that a lot of your units consolidate the meds and then people go in, or is it, it's distributed among the adults that have to deal with it?
It really varies depending on where we're at. Now, I know that, you have a lot of really cool camps are within your state that I don't know if that's primarily where you all go, but in Illinois, we can trip over a state line and be in Indiana or Wisconsin or Michigan, and we're right there. And each state has their own laws. So there are some times that when we go to a campsite, not only do we have to relinquish the medical forms, we have to relinquish the meds and then hike the kids back and forth to a central location where somebody who is qualified is administering those meds. In other cases, we will have one adult. I when I go camping, I have a 2-room tent. And when we're in a state where we're allowed to do that, one room of my tent is set up as the medical distribution area. We keep the meds in there, and any adult on our campsite knows that they are welcome to go in my tent, and we keep a log. So as we're administering the medicine, we're documenting that. But it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So I'm sorry. I wish I had something definitive
No worries.
for you.
I was just curious what your experience with that is, because I've seen units that do both.
Yeah, and as long as you're very careful with it, I don't think there's a wrong way. It's just what I always get worried about is, when somebody's handing you medication, it should be in the original packaging. It should have the instructions on it. You shouldn't have somebody handing you a baggie of medication that you're uncertain as to what it is. And yeah, then you're forced to have the responsibility of trying to figure out whether or not they get the little blue pill or the little red pill, and you're not confident whether or not the person that's distributing it is colorblind. So, I would never want to be in that situation. I always err on the side of caution. When you're working with the scout, directly with the scout, you want to make sure that you're respecting their autonomy. You want to make sure that you're working with them directly and respectfully. Start with assuming that the scout can understand and handle their own disability. Very often, even though their maturity level may not seem the same as their peers, they have a better understanding of it than many people give them credit for. Now, does that mean that you just assume that's the case? No. It means that you start out with these conversations and make sure that you know what their baseline is and work from there. You want to make sure that, as I said before, they're engaged in their journey. So help them create solutions, give them options. Very often kids on the spectrum don't respond well to, we're going to do A, B, and C. Instead, offer them, would you prefer to do this now? Or would you prefer to do it in 30 minutes? Or, would you prefer to do A, or would you prefer to do B if there's options? But, avoid directly issuing commands. You want them to become their own advocate. So helping them along that way is going to be key. And then as leaders, it's okay for you to talk amongst yourself as leaders to crowdsource solutions. What it's not okay to do is grouse about a kid and their parent and the situation. And imagine too, that for many of the leaders that are in a unit, they are leaders because their youth are part of that unit. So if you are part of that unit leadership and you are struggling with how you're going to help a youth that has special needs within your unit, there are people that are listening in at your home. And those types of things, whether intended or not, can make their way back through the grapevine to school and to social situations. So you want to be super sensitive of where you're having those conversations so that you're respectful of the situation and the solution. Now, here's my joining conference form that we fill out in my unit. So this is what we've put together. This can be modified to be whatever information you want to gather. This is like, in my mind, a first contact form. So just to try to understand in the broad strokes. There are other forms you can find on the national website. And I gave Dan and Trish a copy of a bunch of different forms and links. If you go to the national webpage, there are all sorts of things that you can tap into. But this is the one that I actually think I pulled this off of there once upon a time and then just adjusted it. But, it's just a Word document and I put in the things that I wanted to know. Okay. As far as time, yep.
Oh, sorry, I think we're just moving, so we're just moving around over here.
Oh, okay. As far as time management, moving from one activity to another activity can be very difficult for kids with special needs. Neurologically diverse kids very often have a very rigid mindset. They don't pivot well. So being very clear in advance of what your expectations are. You're driving to a campsite, you're going to get there, and when we get there, everybody's going to have to unload and bring the gear to a central location. From there, you're going to buddy up. Then everybody's going to, whatever it is, those types of situations where you know that there are tasks that need to be performed should be laid out in advance so that there is an expectation of, we're not just going to roll out of the vehicles when we get to camp and start running around and having a good time and making snowballs and having a battle or doing whatever. They need to know very clearly that when we get there, report to your patrol leader or your SPL or whatever the expectation is. Transitioning from one activity to another can also be very difficult for any of these kids. So giving a time warning of, you've got your half-hour warning, your 15-minute warning, your 10-minute warning, and then, so that you're easing into it, because just stopping on a dime and saying, we're going to do this now. That was one of the things with our unit leader when my son first started. He would do this thing where, it was almost like a game, like, okay, everybody freeze. We're going to do this now. Like, oh, no, that doesn't work for my kid. He needs the half hour, 15 minutes, and then he's great. He never had a problem with it, but he couldn't just stop on a dime and shift gears like that. That's not how his mind works. And then breaking up the direction in small, manageable bites. Giving some kids 5-step directions is great when you've got a kid that can do that. The average kid can't do that. I don't care whether they're neurologically typical or not. Some of them can only make 2 steps. First do this, then do that. First do this, then come back and ask me. Then do that and come back and ask me. And then, I'll give you the next step. But eventually you're working towards first do this, that, and the other thing. And then step number 4 is come back and ask me, because it's building blocks, right? We're trying to give them the tools so that they can grow in the direction that we want them to. But you might not be able to start at that point. So any kind of behavior is going to be a warning sign of something. So for some kids with ADHD, and if they're on the spectrum, or I will say, just being boys, any boy, if they get fidgety, you're about to lose their attention. So being able to schedule breaks and whatever you have planned, so that you know that you're going to be doing things in 15-minute increments. If any of you have spent any time in a kindergarten classroom, you know that that's how kindergarten teachers plan. Nothing is more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes up and move to the next spot. 15 minutes, we move to something new. That's because that's their attention span. And I used to be a catechist for Sunday school, and I always thought my kid was not, he was not on the same playing field as the rest of his peers, until I got into a classroom where on Wednesday nights they had this special class for all of the kids that were in the football team, the traveling football team, a bunch of 5th graders. And I had 13 boys and 1 girl in this class. And on any given day, somebody fell out of their chair. And to the point where we had to create a rule that said, at any time, you must have 2 legs of your chair on the ground at all times. And after I was in that class, I was like, my kid isn't that different than any other kid. Boys get fidgety. Girls less so, but they still appreciate the movement. Some of the strategies that we have used is a break token. So if somebody needs a break and they need to tap out and go, sometimes leave the room. Sometimes there's a spot in meeting places. I've seen it with kids where one of the gals that's on our team, our special needs team, has a sensory tent. It's a special tent that is intended for indoor use, and it's kind of got a blackout aspect to it, so that if you're in a really bright room, you can kind of mute it. And then she's got like a big squishy chair in there, so it's kind of giving you a hug if you sit into it. And when some of the kids need a sensory break, they can go into this sensory deprivation kind of room and sit in this chair and kind of take a breather before they're ready to come back out into the group. Anyway, giving a nonverbal or proximity signal to the scout to focus. So some kids will respond to hand signs, like, okay, we're coming up on the time. You can give them a move it along, you whatever, but you have to agree upon whatever it is. Now, my son has some, and I shared them with my unit so everybody knew what his were, but you might have to come up with your own. Now here, this anger iceberg thing, I thought this graphic was kind of interesting because it is so true. Any kind of behavior is a form of communication. So being able to look at somebody and seeing what that is. So if they're fidgety, it's probably meaning that they need to get a break. Sometimes if they're being oppositional, it could be that they don't know how to do what it is that they're being asked to do. And instead of admitting that they don't know how to do it and asking for help, it flares up in being grumpy, or I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to be silly, and I'm going to take, I'm going to distract everybody because I can't do what I need to do for whatever feeling that I'm having. And it's like playing whack-a-mole, where you've got these feelings popping up all over the place. And as a leader, you're trying to figure out what does that mean? Why am I seeing the behavior that I'm seeing? So being sensitive to that and trying to key into that is going to be key. Again, if you don't know, asking the parents is always a good start, because sometimes they will know exactly why that child is behaving that way. Here's an adaptive approach. One of the things that we do at our camporees, we started our special needs committee about 10 years ago as a district. My husband and I started it in the district that we are part of. And then eventually it became a council-wide disability awareness committee. And we have 12 districts. We serve 11,000 scouts. And each district has its own district champion. And a big part of what we do is bring awareness to the fact that there are scouts with learning differences and that nobody ever has to do this by themselves. There is no reason for anybody in scouting to have to reinvent the wheel, because whatever you are experiencing might be unique to you. It's not unique to everybody. We crowdsource our solutions. So just because every one of our districts has a district champion, that doesn't mean that one individual within the district is going to have the solution to whatever it is that you're struggling with as a parent, as a unit leader, as a scout. There is somebody that you can go to, your phone a friend, if you will, where you can pick up the phone and say, this is what I'm experiencing. How do I respond to this? What options are available to me? And one of our initiatives is to have tables like what you're seeing this little boy doing at our camporee. We do it at camporee. We do it at district kickoffs. We do it. We have a couple Cub Scout days. We did it at day camp. We're going to do one at NOAC. Anyway, pretty much the same thing you would do at a disability awareness merit badge. In this case, we give the kid huge gloves, and he's got a bolt, and he's got a washer, and he's got a nut, and he's got to assemble it. And at that time, we're talking to the kids and talking to them about how somebody who has dexterity problems, this is what they're experiencing. How you can sit there and pick up this, this washer quite easily when you don't have your glove on. See how hard it is when you've got the glove on. And that's what these people experience it every day. And we have all sorts of different stations. But the idea is, first of all, getting them to understand that not everybody is navigating through life at the same pace that they are, with the same challenges that they are. But trying to come up with creative solutions and put them in the mindset that they can help be part of the solution. So when we're talking about adaptive approaches, we are not changing the resource, we're changing the resources, but not the objectives. So to give you an example, my son, one of the things that he has is motor planning problems, but he also has ataxia. So he shakes really bad. So when he was going through advancement and he had to tie knots, he's got this rope flopping all over the place, and he couldn't get a handle on it. So I sat there, I'm a professional trainer. So a lot of what I do is coming up with solutions to help people absorb things in a different manner. So I sat there and I thought about it. I hate knots. And I thought, well, how can I help him understand what the path of the knot is? So the first thing I did is I got him a pipe cleaner, because a pipe cleaner is not floppy and it maintains its shape. So first we tied a knot and we talked, okay, this is what the knot looks like when it's finished. Then I got two different colored pipe cleaners and fused them together. So it had red on one side, blue on the other, so he could follow the path on his own. Once he understood what the pathway of that knot was, my next stop was to go on Amazon, and I found a rope that is a little thicker than the normal ropes that we would use when we're doing this with our first year scouts. But I found one that essentially had a pipe cleaner's core. It felt like a regular rope on the outside, but the inside of it was stiff. And I fused that too. So I said that same red and blue, got him to do that. And eventually he graduated to a regular rope and he was able to do it. So in his case, I looked at him and what his needs were and came up with a path to get him to that. Didn't change the objective, just changed the materials we were using to get him there. Then when we're talking about ensuring accessibility for all, we're wanting to make sure that we are removing whatever barriers that we can for any of the events that we're having. So if we are planning something, we are planning it for the least common denominator. We have a kid that cannot take his wheelchair through sand. We're not going through sand. We will take a path that takes us around the sand. We can still take a hike, but we're just not going to hike through the sand today. Using a buddy to deliver, and we're going to have a slide a little later on about the use of peers, but having a buddy is not the same as the buddy system. Having a buddy, having a peer that you can use as a mentor can be really key. I know, like for my kid and for a lot of the kids that I've interacted with, very often when you've got kids that go through life having to go through therapy, most therapists are female. Most teachers are female. If you can get a boy buddied with a boy, they're going to listen to that kid better than any adult that you can imagine. Because I know that my kid, I was on a frequency he didn't hear anymore. I was the person that did his therapy with him. I was the person who did his homework with him. I was the person that had him clean up his room. At a certain point, I could say the same exact thing as this strange young man that's 12 years old is telling my kid, and my kid's listening to him and he's not listening to me, but that's okay. That's what we want. And then use group or individual instruction, but you're going to have to figure out what works best for that kid. It's not going to be a one size fits all answer. And if it's okay to adjust the environment. I will tell you that I had a unit that approached me. They had a kid that had crossed over 2 years before. He was still at Scout. He knew how to do a whole bunch of different things. He had a whole bunch of stuff signed off in his book, but he had never gone and had a conference. He had never ranked up. And the reason he hadn't ranked up after talking to his unit leadership was because none of these things were signed off in his book, even though they knew that he had done them. So I had gone out to the unit with the intent of helping them figure out how they were going to adapt requirements that they were going to apply to have the requirements changed. And after talking to the unit leaders and after talking to the kid, I realized that the problem or the barrier was not the kid and his ability to do the work. The barrier was the traditions that the unit had. This kid was on the autism spectrum. He was using all of his energies to hold everything together during the meeting so that he could do all of the work. And then when they gave him free time at the end of the meeting, their unit tradition was that at whatever work was completed during the meeting, the kids take their book and they stand in line and they work their way up to the front of the table where their SPL signed off on stuff. Well, between the time that they finished the task and the sign off happened, There are kids sitting 10 deep waiting to get things signed off on, and this kid's wandering off because he has had it. He has done all of the work. He got all of the things that they asked of him completed, but what he couldn't do was stand in a line to work his way to the front of that line to get it signed off on. That's a unit tradition. That is not a rank requirement. So when I sat down with the unit leadership and I was like, can we just approach him? Well, that's not what we do. We require that he asked. And I was like, you realize that's not in the guide to advancement. There is no requirement that says that. And, and that could be a goal we're working towards. But right now, we have a kid that has done all of what you've asked him to do, but he's not advancing because it's not signed off in his book. And the only thing that is standing in his way is an artificial barrier. And they're like, oh, it's like, let's work towards that. Maybe by the time he gets to star rank, he'll be able to stand in that line and ask, but that's not a requirement. So adjusting that environment was critical for that kid. Anyway, all of the scouts need expectations, right? That's what we're there for. We provide that framework. There is an expectation in any advancement of they are going to be doing the work. And those same expectations need to be applied to all scouts. Now, does that mean that you don't have to nudge, or you don't have to sit there and say, okay, this is where this kid is struggling and course correct if you need to? Of course not. But you want to make sure that you're not just paving the way and making it so that there is no expectation. Because I will tell you that my experience with working with special needs scouts, and I've worked with quite a few, is if you raise the bar, they'll sail across it. I very, very impressed with the fact that these kids will always rise to the level that we expect them to with the proper supports. It's not an excuse for uncontrolled behavior, and I'm not advocating for that at all. You have to set boundaries. There's consequences to actions, but you have to have that bar set. Now, I think, yep. Okay, so this is my kiddo. Scouting, in my mind, is the best program out there for all kids. But there is such a value in it for kids with special needs that they need it so much more than any kid, in my mind. It's a ready-made social group, right? There is a clear-cut set of a path forward, if you will. So if you were to look at my son, he has an invisible disability. Very bright kid, more abilities than disabilities, but his abilities will make him so that he's never going to live independently. And when he had his first neuropsych evaluation when he was 5, it was kind of daunting when they told us all of the things that were going on and not knowing where to start because there was so much that was overlapping. When my son was 17 years old, we took him back to the same doctor for a neuropsych evaluation. In the state of Illinois, you get services, educational services until the day before your 22nd birthday. And the school districts ask you to go and get a present level of performance. So I had the same doctor that assessed him at 5, assessed him at 15. And when my son walked out of the room, now, mind you, his file's probably a good 7 inches thick. And when my son walked out of the room, the doctor turned to me and he said, that kid that's in this file is not the kid that I just met. And how do you account for that? And I said it was scouting. And it absolutely, in my mind, is scouting. My son at 27 is still doing the same task list that he put together for him to do his family life chores. He didn't know how to do any of those chores. We had to teach him how to do those chores. It was torture for him to learn how to do those chores. But once he learned it, he never forgot it. And those are the same chores he does today. And, he has, you can't see it on him. He's got an eagle ring that he wears when he graduated from high school. I get him a choice of an eagle ring or his high school ring. And he said, you know what, Mom? I want an eagle ring because everybody graduates from high school, but not everybody gets to be an eagle. And I have heard this kid, he kind of thinks out loud. He uses his ring as a touchstone. He knows that if he breaks down his tasks in manageable pieces, he will be able to achieve his goals. And it's something that he talks to himself about all the time. When something is hard, when something is new, when something is challenging, he tells himself that if I can make Eagle, I can do this. And it's so funny because, it's almost like he thinks there's a talk bubble that nobody else can hear, but I can hear. I mean, he's saying it out loud. And I know that this is what motivates his life. He knows that because he made it to Eagle, this is something that is attainable for him, whatever that new task is. Recently it was learning how to use the floor Zamboni. He's a custodian. The floor Zamboni is like the best thing in the world and he loves it. But he learned a new task, something that is challenging, because he knows that he is capable of it from having learned this through scouting. This is another quote that I kept in here from Maya Angelou: "We're more alike than we're different." And I think that one of the things that this has taught me by being involved with special needs within scouting is that the peers get as much from it as the kids that are struggling. I have very often partnered kids together and for one reason or another, and I find that both of the kids blossom, and it's really fulfilling to me to see how that enriches the lives of all of the scouts by having an opportunity to mentor their peers and for them to see the cause and effect of that mentorship. So in the context of scouting and saying, youth with disabilities can be considered an underserved community due to the barriers in traditional scouting activities. And I for every success story that I have for you, I have another one where a unit wasn't a good fit because somebody is unwilling to adapt. And it's not always on the scouting leaders by somebody. Sometimes it's the parents. Sometimes the parents don't recognize the kids need more supports. They want to push their kids out of moving cars, throw them into a meeting and say, here's my kid, go ahead and teach them to be a good scout. And it's a partnership, absolutely a partnership between the parents and the units. And it's up to you to figure out what that partnership looks like. I recognize the fact that some of the kids that I have had in my units over the years, their parents are not campers. They cannot be part of that solution in that respect. That doesn't mean that they can't support the journey. And there's a lot of different ways that they can look, and it's all an open dialogue. So as far as the supports to leaders, this is a team effort. Most units have a number of adult leaders, and you're going to be encouraging those positive interactions with the kids and the families. You're collaborating with the families. Make sure that the strategies are not a one size fits all. You're going to have to look at the kid, any kid. It doesn't matter if they're neurologically typical or not. Everybody's path to getting the swimming merit badge is different. There are some kids, I can't even tell you how many kids I've encountered over the years that you have to put your face in the water, kiddo. Okay, oh, I'm not ready to do that. Well, let's figure out how we're going to make that happen, because there's kids that will only earn the swimming merit badge in the swimming pool. You put them in a lake and they can't see the bottom of the pool, and suddenly everything they seem to know about swimming is flown out the window. That's very common. And what we see with neurologically typical kids is very common with these kids in the diverse population. So, and I would say promoting inclusivity is key, and whatever that looks like. When you're planning your events, we in my council, we have our strategy with our committee is to have somebody at every single one of our main committees be part of the special needs committee. Now, does that mean that we are recruiting a separate individual to be on every one of those committees? No, doesn't. I'm on the advancement committee. I also happen to be on the special needs committee, but when I'm on the advancement committee, I am looking at everything that's happening in advancement through the lens of special needs. So when it's necessary and when when it's appropriate, I will bring up, hey, what about this? Now, when we're doing activities, hey, I know so-and-so is coming. Has anybody ordered a porta-john that has handicap accessible, railings? Or we're going to the shooting sports activities, and do we have anybody that has this, that, or the other type of, adaptive equipment for somebody that can't use one of their arms? So those are the types of things where we have people on all of those committees that just sit there and think about how we're going to make things inclusive for all of our events. So it's the same thing that should be happening at a unit level, is that somebody's looking at who's participating in this, and are we making it so that everybody can participate? And I guess I haven't even, like, very often we're accommodating things like, we've got kids that have celiacs, gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan. I had one kid that came to NYLT. I've done a lot of staffing for NYLT, and this kid had some endocrine issue. I never even heard of it, but there were a whole lot of foods that we had to consider. And it's like, nobody should ever have to stay home because we can't feed them. There's always some way we can make that happen, right? But that was his disability. I can't say enough about how every scout deserves a trained leader. I think that every one of the courses that scouting offers, the in-person courses in particular, are very valuable in terms of trying to figure out how to adapt. I know in our council, my husband goes to every one of the IOLS and Baloo training. He does the cooking demo, but he brings my son who has special needs. He is part of our committee, and they do a special segment at every one of our outdoor training classes for the entire council on adapting things for special needs. So that's important, and I think that's getting to be more and more common at all of the in-person training. But I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that when you're going to those in-person training, I think that's where you find your core group of who you can count on, who you can reach out to. It's great having all of the online training, and I'm kind of an addict because I am a trainer. I want to see what's out there. People ask me. So if you looked at my training record, it's an obscene amount of training, but there's nothing replaces the in-person training, because that's where you're going to get your network of people that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, can you help me with this? Pardon me. So in terms of mentoring, as far as leader mentoring, meeting with the leaders regularly, kids, leaders, adults, or parents rather, you're going to want to make sure that you're giving them all the encouragement. They need to hear it. They absolutely need to hear what they're doing well, and setting them on the right path for success. And here we are talking about joining conferences again. So emphasizing character development. This one I think is particularly important because sometimes with that social piece that some kids that are neurodivergent have, it's really important to be able to lay down this foundation of what the scouting program, the oath, the law, and how it plays into their behavior and how they conduct themselves and what the expectations are within the unit. All of this, all of the key pieces here are going to be foundational in terms of making sure that they understand what the program is all about, and that there is a standard that they are going to be held to. So that is really critical. I think we do that across the board with all of our youth, but you might have to take an extra beat and spend a little bit more time with these kiddos and make sure that they are clear on what these expectations are. And then being proactive, you just, take a look at the book, see what the next things are that these kids are going to be working on, and make sure you have a path to get through that. Take a look at what their diagnosis is. Where are the challenges? You know, I know that there is a kid in my unit right now who he has a bunch of congenital problems. Neither one of his feet work well. He has one arm that doesn't work at all. And you know, so what I started sitting down with him when he got to STAR to try to figure out how we were going to get him to Eagle. It's really important. His older brother's an Eagle. It's very important to him. Not every kid, you know, finds it important to get to Eagle, but if that's their path, if that's their goal, my goal is to help them get there. And this kid really wanted to figure out how to do this. And in looking at it, we realized he wasn't going to be able to do it the standard way. He was not going to be able to do a swimming merit badge. He wasn't going to be able to do hiking. He can't do biking because of his orthopedic issues. So in those cases, there are other avenues to seek out to modify the program. And anyway, that one seems a little repetitive. We're going to scroll past a couple of these. So like I said, I Frankenstein this together, so some of it's repetitive. Partnering with peers is really critical. I have found this to be very successful in terms of the relationship on both ends. I have one kid that I noticed in the meetings that our scout with special needs was really fascinated with anything he had to say. He was just, you know, the be all end all. Anytime something came out of this kid's mouth, our little fella that had special needs just was like, yeah, what he said, I want to do that too. So what I started asking him to do is spend time when we were at our week-long summer camps, you know, like, hey, could you spend some time with him doing this, that, or the other thing? And I found out that he really enjoyed doing it. So that partnership worked out really well. Now, this young man was somebody that was part of my Explorer post for engineering, and I always thought he was going to be an engineer. And today he is a special ed teacher. And he told me that he's a special ed teacher because of that partnership I asked him to do, that he just really realized how fulfilling it was for him to work with this young man. And it just fed his soul in a way that engineering didn't. So that was kind of cool. So here's one of the links that you should have in your in the chat that I think Trish and Dan are going to share with you. But the Inclusion Toolbox is the national webpage. And when you go there, if you wanted to do your own roundtable, or if you wanted to do, I don't know, let's say you've got a kickoff meeting and you wanted to have some handouts. If you go to the Inclusion Toolbox, there are a bunch of prepackaged training segments that are part of that. Some of them are just one-page PDF handouts, but many of them are full-blown packages that will allow you to do a PowerPoint. So that's something that we encourage people to take a look at. The Abilities Digest is a newsletter, it's a national newsletter, and articles are written in it. They actually give you practical advice on how to adapt certain things, success stories that they have picked up from here and there around the country. They'll highlight different things. And I found that to be very useful. When you're planning events within your unit, you want to make sure that you're considering the accessibility, sensory, make sure the clear communication both to the scout and the parents so that they know what the expectations are. You want to make sure that everybody is involved in whatever solutions that you have, so that you have buy-in from everybody. Everybody knows their role. Any safety measures that you may need to take that are different than your norm. Those are the types of things that you need to talk through and make sure that everybody is clear on. And then assess what kind of individual support you may need. We've talked about that. One of the possible adaptations in here, this is actually my brother-in-law who is on the special needs committee. We are trying to get therapy dogs allowed at different events. And we just this last week got permission to include this therapy dog. This is Milo. He's a Native American Indian dog, and he's highly trained. And we wanted to bring him to the camporee that we have going on in the fall. And we're going to have a little station. What we have found is that kids can decompress when they're interacting with animals. I'm sure you've seen them in airports and hospitals. They're all over the place. Scouting, if you go to the national page, says, you know, we don't allow anything but service animals, but there are exceptions that can be made at council level. And we just recently got an exception for a specific type of event. So that's kind of cool that we're going to be able to do that. But we're adapting. We're looking at where our needs are and seeing what kind of solutions we can offer to meet those needs. So that's something that I would encourage everybody to do. As far as advancement support, this is one that we could do a whole seminar just on this. But in Cub Scouts, the benchmark is do your best. So you don't really have to adapt. Whatever the kid can do, whatever that Cub Scout is capable of, if they're trying and they've done their best, they have met that standard. Now, when you're in Scouts BSA, it's different. So there is something that's called Individual Scout Advancement Plan. For anybody that's familiar with an IEP, an Individualized Education Plan, which is the educational version of this is what your present level of performance is, and this is how we're going to modify your academic school requirements in order to meet the needs that that particular student has. Scouting has one that's just like that. And the Individualized Scout Advancement Plan, or the ISAP, takes the rank requirements up through first class and allows the Council Advancement Committee to approve any adaptations. Now, the idea is that a Scout should always try their best to do them as written. And in many cases, if you sit down and you look at those requirements, they can be done in a way that doesn't require any adaptations if you get creative. For instance, if I needed to take a hike and I'm in a wheelchair, my mode of transportation is a wheelchair. So I don't need to do an ISAP for that, because my normal mode of transportation is that wheelchair. So done and done. Okay, you just have to fill in the blanks there and like, okay, that's how I am. That's my mobility device. So we're good there. It's only when they cannot fulfill the requirements as written that you have to put together the ISAP. And then there is a form that you fill out. There is a medical form as well. It goes to your Council Advancement Committee. They review it. I had two brothers that suffered. They have, I forget what you call it, but it's a heart condition. And what they were unable to pass the swim test because being submerged in cold water sent their heart into AFib. So they couldn't do that. So instead, what we did as an adaptation for the two of them is we looked at what the requirement was. Well, what is the requirement of the swim test? Well, if they're not actually using it to swim, then really what we're looking at that, in my mind, is as a safety measure, right? We want them to be safe around water. So ultimately, that's what we're looking for. So when we were looking at the requirements for them, we adapted them so that they were poolside coaching somebody else through that. And they had to verbalize. So we rewrote it so that the requirement was for the verbalization of all of the things that needed to get done. And that fulfilled the requirement for them. But we can't just, well-meaning, willy-nilly change those things. At a unit level, you can't change those things, right? We have to have a documented path to get them to Eagle. So if that's something that they want, we can't just modify it because we know that they need to have it changed. It has to be documented, signed off on, filed, so that when they move on to the next step in that process, that we have all of that paperwork that substantiates that, yes, that was approved by the proper channels, okay? And that we just didn't change it just because it was inconvenient at that time. Alternate rank requirements, so, I'm sorry. So if we were doing, actually, that should say alternate merit badge requirements. Once you get up to first class, that's when you start getting the options for your service hours and specific Eagle required merit badges. So in the instance of my scout that I was telling you that could not do the hiking, biking, or swimming because of his orthopedic issues, we're going through a process right now where we're filling out the form, and we're going to choose a different merit badge for him based on what his doctor says he can do. There are recommendations right on the form of if you're looking to replace something in this category, consider these merit badges. So there are suggestions that are built into it. The caveat being that scout cannot be assigned an Eagle required merit badge to do that they've already completed. So if it says on the form that a suitable merit badge to replace hiking would be canoeing, and he's already got canoeing, then we can't consider that. So, just the form's pretty self-explanatory, but again, it requires medical documentation, and it does go through your council advancement committee. Now, in some councils, it goes somewhere else first, but ultimately it says right on the form that the council advancement committee signs off on it. And then ultimately your scout executive. And then registration beyond the age of eligibility. If you have a scout who is wanting to remain in scouting beyond 18 years of age, they can perpetually remain a youth in the program by filling out this registration beyond the age of eligibility. Again, you need the proper medical diagnoses and the documentation from the doctor, but they could remain a youth forever as long as they maintain their registration. And we have scouts that are in their 30s that are just earning Eagle now. So there is no timeline to finishing Eagle once you're registered beyond the age, but you are a youth as long as you maintain that. And then finally, there are time extensions to earn Eagle. They are very, very restrictive. Like, although ADHD is a disability, it doesn't rise to the level of what would be required to get an extension for a disability, because ADHD is not like a late onset sort of thing. That would be a lifelong diagnosis. Typically, you can diagnose ADHD, from what my neurologist tells me, as young as 5. So most people are diagnosed pretty early on, and then they know that that is something they have to factor into their scouting journey. So it does even say on the forms, there's certain things that, it won't rise to the level of being considered an extension worthy diagnosis, but there are some that it will. So if you find yourself getting close to the finish line and you're getting bogged down with whatever it is that scout is diagnosed with, it's worth taking a look at that form and seeing whether or not you meet the 3 tests that are part of the extension form. Then we talked about the ISAP. You're going to find somewhere in this journey that there are going to be bumps in the road. And I would encourage you to be very thoughtful about it. Consult your committee, work with your leadership, work with your parents. See if you can find your way to a solution without making snap decisions. You want to make sure that you have very clear expectations, and it's okay to create rules that work for the situation that you're in. We've had instances where scouts are only allowed to attend campouts when they have an adult with them. Their adult, I should say, not just any adult, but a registered adult that is assigned to be their one-on-one, who is responsible for their well-being. and responsible for making sure that they are abiding by whatever rules. It's okay to give yourself permission to create a situation that is safe for everybody and is manageable for everybody. But you want to make sure that you're not making decisions in a vacuum. You want to, sit down with people, again, crowdsource. That is your best way of coming up with solutions. I know that we had situations in my unit when I first started with my son where there were other scouts that had special needs that the scoutmaster was like, well, I want all of their parents to show up too. And in some cases that wasn't the case. So I ended up with my own patrol of special needs scouts that I took responsibility for them. And I was working with their parents or guardians and making sure that everybody knew what the expectations were. And, I was one person. And sometimes I just had to be very firm with, these are my expectations. And if we can't make it work within these expectations, I was only one person, you can only do what you can do. And it's okay. It's okay to have an action plan, to have any kind of corrective action, take a week off. You're not allowed to go on the next meeting until this behavior gets corrected, until I see improvement in this. Much the same way we all have expectations at home. It's okay to have them within a unit. Again, you are responsible for the health and wellness of every kid that's coming. So it's you making sure that you are creating a plan that works for everybody, that builds advocacy for that kid so that they are aware and taking ownership and, taking into account what their abilities are. So, let's go to the in conclusion. So this is the challenge that they've asked us to include in here, is when you're thinking about your scouting experience, do the units in your district or council practice this type of inclusiveness? And if it doesn't, if your answer to that is no, I don't think so, or we could do better, how can you change? How can you change the culture of what you are experiencing currently to make it more productive and more welcoming and more inclusive to the scouts that you have coming in? And that's where I'm going to leave you. The one last thing that I would include, I know in what I had shared with Trish and Dan, is there is a social media section on that handout that I gave you. And there is a page called No Scout Left Behind. It's a Facebook page that includes scouting families from around the world. And in addition to that, the toolbox, the inclusivity toolbox that we talked about, the No Scout Left Behind is the single best resource that I have found. It is monitored by the national team. And I found that sometimes, like if I'll go on there and ask a question, sometimes people from the National Disability Awareness team will respond back to me. Sometimes it's just other families who said, yep, we have that in our unit and this is how we solve that problem, or consider doing this or looking there. And there's always an answer. And it hands down, best experience is going to the No Scout Left Behind webpage or Facebook page. So anyway, I know we covered a lot of ground. We zigzagged a bit. Like I said, I cobbled this thing together, but I'd like to open it up if you have any questions.
Awesome. Well, I think you did a very in-depth job to the point where people don't have questions. So thank you, Colleen. I appreciate your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Taking this time to sit with us and go over this topic, which I think is one of those topics that everybody experiences, but everybody experiences differently, like you said. So your plethora of resources are, I think, going to help our unit leaders here very heavily, as well as, the Facebook and the social media pages where they're able to connect and get ideas from other people. So Thank you so much for all your time. I appreciate
very
you being
welcome.
here with us. And if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and end it here. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Colleen.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank
All right, take care.